To me, home composting is one of the joys of gardening. Not only does it help you recycle all the compostable plant and green waste you generate in your kitchen and garden, so avoiding having to send it somewhere else to be recycled, but it turns it into beautiful compost that can be used to mulch your flower beds or dig in to improve your soil. And that saves you money having to buy bags of soil conditioner and mulch, which are getting more and more expensive by the year. So being a greener gardener and recycling your garden waste has the bonus of saving you money too. In this video I'll show you 4 ways I make my own compost. Firstly, using what I call a traditional compost bin. Secondly, using worm bins to make worm compost and liquid feed. Thirdly, there's composting all those fallen autumn leaves into beautiful leaf mould. And lastly, a technique I call trench composting, ideal for composting all your kitchen peelings over the winter months. So let's get started. My composting area sits out of sight behind my greenhouse, along with some water butts that fill up with rainwater from the greenhouse gutters. I'm lucky to have space in my garden and currently have 5 different compost bins and a worm bin and bags of autumn leaves stacked up and left to rot down. But I have got quite a decent sized garden and I generate a lot of material which needs to be composted. Most of my compost bins are made out of recycled plastic. I've tried wooden bins in the past, but I find the wood has rotted. It was fine for a while, but just didn't last, which makes it a very poor investment as they're quite expensive to buy in the first place. In contrast, some of my recycled plastic bins have been in continual use for nearly 30 years and they're still going strong. Of course, you could make your own bin by recycling old wooden pallets or doors or other material you can get hold of, and that's great. After all, a bin is a bin, and really any structure that can contain kitchen and garden waste can act as a compost bin. One of my composters is called the hot bin, a large bin made from some sort of black polystyrene that provides great insulation properties to hold in heat as the material decomposes under the action of bacteria and microorganisms, and this heat speeds up the whole composting process. The hotter the better for this style of composting, and these well insulated bins are highly recommended. You can even monitor this heat by referring to the thermometer installed in the lid of the bin. Isn't it amazing just how much heat these tiny organisms produce breaking down your garden waste? The hot bin has a panel at the bottom, and this can be taken off to provide access to remove the finished compost. So with this simple bin you can continually add more material at the top, which gradually breaks down into compost and can be removed from the bottom. With my solid walled bins I tend to fill them one at a time and then leave them so their contents can rot down over several months. This is a cold composting process and the material won't really heat up as much as it does in a hot bin. You could invest in a compost turning gadget like this, which you plunge in and pull out of the compost to churn up the contents, or if you're feeling strong, empty out the contents of the bin, mix it all up to add air and mix up the material, and then refill your bin. And if your material does at any time appear to be dry, then sprinkle it with water to make it moist. Material won't rot down if it dries out, so keep a lid on the bin or cover it up in some way to keep the material inside moist. It also keeps out excessive rainfall to make sure the material doesn't get waterlogged, and it contains the heat inside the heap to some degree too. My latest compost bin is the Thermo King, which comes in 3 different sizes to suit different gardens: a 400 litre size, medium 600 litre size, or a large 900 litre compost bin. As my garden generates quite a lot of material, I chose the largest, the Thermo King 900 litre compost bin, which is really a big cube container measuring about 1 metre height, 1 metre wide and 1 metre deep. This bin is made of 100% recycled plastic, and it uses what they call thermoline technology within its polypropylene plastic to produce a well insulated bin that helps retain warmth within the compost to speed up the natural composting process. And once your compost is ready, there's short panels at the base of either side of the bin that can be removed to give access to dig out the compost from the bottom. It's a flat pack design and construction makes it quick and easy to put up in minutes, and this is how I built mine. Today I'm going to be adding to my compost bin collection, and I've cleared this corner at the bottom of the garden to put up a new bin called the Thermo King. Comes in a kit form, but it should be very easy to put together. I've got the 4 sides and the panels just to clip in. So those are the 2 sides, and I've got a shorter front and back. Let's see how these go. Try these on the back first. As I say, these kit pieces should just slot on to one another and push down in place. It's a little bit fiddly times, just get them over and push down. That's it. And on the other side, locate them into position and then push down. There, we're getting there. And now onto the back panels. And finally, the final front piece. And I imagine once I get these compost bins going, that actually when I need to get compost out and empty them, I'll literally be able to take these panels off quite easily. I'm going to get out first. And this is a really lovely, decent sized bin. It's actually one of the biggest ones I could find because I make lots of leaf mould and compost. So I'm going to just gently position that right in the corner of the garden. And it comes with a lid. The lid is also in 2 sections, so I've just got to slot these 2 together. Let's have a look, see how this goes. There we go. I can put that on, catch on either end. There we go. Nice bin, easy to open, to put stuff in and out. Keep it closed to hopefully let the temperature inside build up and the compost to get warmer. There we have my new little compost corner. It's always a pleasure sharing my hints, tips, ideas and advice with everyone. So please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button right away and subscribe to my gardening channel. There's plenty more videos on my channel for you to enjoy too. So exactly what material can you add to your compost heap? Well, quite a lot actually. Firstly, there's plant material from around your garden, including fallen leaves, soft prunings, flowers collected while deadheading and leafy weeds. I do avoid putting any weeds that have produced seed heads into my compost heap, or any deep-rooted weeds like ground elder, bindweed or mare's tail, as these can sometimes continue growing. So keep these out of your compost bins and dispose of them in other ways instead. If you have a lawn, you can add your lawn clippings to your bins through the year. Little and often is best, rather than adding big loads at one time that can form a solid mass. I mix my clippings in with kitchen and garden waste at the same time and then add these to the bin. And lawn clippings do compost quickly and they heat up, which is great for speeding up the composting process. Secondly, there are kitchen peelings. These can all be mixed into your compost heap. Vegetable peelings from carrots, potatoes, parsnips and turnips. Any vegetable peelings or trimmings or offcuts can be added. Plus fruit skins like banana skins and the cores of fruit. Crushed eggshells add calcium and they lower the acidity of your compost, but do crush them up into small pieces rather than put them in whole, as they'll almost certainly come out whole if you add them whole, so crush them up first. Tea bags and coffee grounds can also be added, but I'd recommend finding a brand of plastic free tea bag or compostable tea bags, as the fine plastic net on some tea bags does not rot down. And thirdly, there's paper and cardboard waste that will compost well. I don't add glossy colour printed magazines to my compost heap, but newspapers can be wrapped around peelings or just scrunched up and added in small but regular quantities. If it's very dry, you can wet it after it's been added and mixed in with lawn clippings and other material. Small quantities of cardboard can be added to your bins too, just the unprinted brown cardboard boxes or card toilet roll tubes or similar material. I often rip these up into smaller pieces so that they're more manageable to mix in with other material to add to your compost heap. As I'm not sure what chemicals printing inks contain, some people prefer not to add printed material to their heap, but the choice is yours. Worm composting is different to traditional composting because we're using the action of worms rather than fungi and bacteria to break down usually your kitchen garden waste into a beautiful compost we call worm compost. But we're not harnessing the traditional earthworm, we're harnessing a composting worm called the tiger worm or brandling worm, the sort of worm anglers use. These will feed on the kitchen waste you put into your bin and turn it into compost and a lovely liquid feed we can use around the garden. This is the can of worms home composting bin. The can of worms comes with a base unit standing on legs, tap in the bottom to let out liquid feed and dilute that for using as a fertiliser around your garden. Then it comes with a series of trays with a lid on top. Some systems come with 2 trays, this one comes with 3 trays. So we've got a lid and then you've got these individual trays which have holes in the base. Now you will start off this system by setting up the base unit. We'll put some layers of newspaper in the bottom, you'll put some bedding material, you'll put your worms in there and you'll start adding your kitchen waste. Now this layer of material will gradually build up over the weeks and then we can put our second tray on top. So it started off just building up the material, and as the layer gets a little bit deeper, when you put this second tray on top, you'll notice the holes in the bottom. This will sit on top of the material already in the base. The composting worms will be feeding on that material and they will gradually work their way up from the bottom, turning all the material you've put in that first tray into that nice worm compost. Then we will start putting our kitchen waste and our peelings and things into the next tray up, and the worms will work their way up through these holes into the new material, the new food source which you've put in your second tray, and you'll gradually start filling up this second tray. All the time we'll be keeping the lid on the top, and once the second tray is pretty full of material, we can put the third tray on top, again with holes in the base, and as the worms work their way up, feeding on the material we've put in the second tray, they will reach the top and they will go up through the holes into the kitchen waste that we've put in the top tray. So gradually the worms have fed on and worked their way up from the first tray into the second tray, from the second tray into the top tray, and we'll go on putting our kitchen waste into this top tray. And once the worms have been well fed in the top tray, you can have a look, and this base tray down here will be full of worm compost, but no worms, because the worms have worked their way up. And we can take the base tray away, we can take the compost out of that, and we can use it on the garden. And then we will gradually take this tray off, you will put the other trays back in place, And the bottom tray now becomes the top tray. You'll wash this out, and then you will gradually put that one onto the top, and the worms will work their way up. So gradually the top tray goes down to the bottom, the worms work their way up. Once the worms have fed on all the material in the bottom, you can use that compost on your garden, empty it out, wash it out, drop the top two trays down and take the empty tray out, put it on the back, and that cycle just continues through the year, using liquid feed regularly as well. Probably every week or so, just empty out any liquid which is accumulated in the base, and use that for feeding the plants around your garden. So let's set up this can of worms. The base unit's here, standing on legs. Tap at the moment is closed. The base, as I say, any liquid that builds up in there, you'll drain out through the tap at the front. We're just going to put this first tray in place. It just settles down over the top there. And the first thing we're going to do is to line the base with some newspaper. This just lays over the bottom, and we'll put the bedding on top of this newspaper. This newspaper really just stops all the worms just dropping down and the compost through the holes into the reservoir at the bottom. So good few layers, or even some cardboard over this base tray. So lay the newspaper out layer by layer. You need quite a few layers to act as the base in the bottom of this tray, just to stop the worms from falling through those holes. As I said, you could use just some unprinted old cardboard instead if you want. The newspaper will also do the trick. Now put in a layer of bedding material. It could be you've got another compost bin around your garden, and you can just put some of the composted material from that over the base, just to act as a little bit of a bedding material. Or you could buy some coir compost or something like that, which again you can mash up and put in. This is literally providing a start for your worms to feed on. Just good broken down organic matter which the worms can start burrowing into. And then you'll buy some worms to start the bin going. You usually get them by mail order, some sort of mail order supplier. So get these worms and just put a layer of these over the bedding material. This is the brandling worm, or the tiger worm, the composting worm. As I said before, different from the earthworm. It's not burrowing in the soil, it won't be living in your garden soil. This is the composting worm. The sort of worm that you find in woodland floors, taking the leaves down and turning that leaf into leaf mould. So just spread these over the base. Then these will burrow their way down and start feeding on the material. Then I'm going to cover these with a little bit more compost from my old compost bin, and these will work their way down into the bedding material to start the composting process. And then if you've got your first bag of kitchen waste, eggshells, banana skins, whatever it might be, just add a small amount of that to the bin. You can chop these up a bit smaller, just chop these up into smaller pieces if you want, just to provide some food for the worms to work into. And then put the lid in place and leave it, and probably that will be okay for about a week now. We can check back, and once that food material has been eaten, we can add some more. My can of worms composting bin has been set up for 3 weeks, so I'm going to check inside now and just see. We've got a few flies flying over composted material. Let's just have a delve down, see what we can see. Yeah, some worms actively in here, at the surface, feeding on the material. Still got quite a lot of vegetable peelings and things on top. I'm going to give them a little bit more today. Just got another bag of kitchen peelings, mainly bits of banana and potato peelings and so on, just to put that on top. Just about a few 100 grams of material there. Put the lid back on and just keep an eye on that, just to see how quickly the worms reproduce, build up, bulk up and eat that material. Now let's have a look and see if there's some more in there. So just loosen the tap. Yep, some more liquid coming through. A whole pint of liquid, lots of liquid, which I can use as a liquid feed around the garden. I'll dilute this with water and use it as a fertilizer to feed my plants. Now I've already got the second layer of the can of worm bins on, and yeah, the worms are working their way up. Several worms in this material here, feeding away at what I put in. I'm just going to put a little bit more kitchen waste into this layer, just spread that over so it's quite nicely full up. And now what I'm going to do is to put the third layer, the third tray on top, and hopefully that will just sit on top of the waste that's in there. And I'm going to now put some kitchen waste into this bin and spread this material out, and hopefully the worms will work up through the holes in the base of the tray into this top layer. I've also got some old crusts from a loaf of bread that I'm not going to eat. Rather than waste it, you can just again break this up and sprinkle it over the other material in the worm bin, and the worms will feed on that too. So today I'm just going to check on the quality of the compost in the bottom tray here, the can of worms. Take the top two trays off. Here's the bottom one, which has got the oldest compost in it. There's still worms active in here, so I can tell the material is still being chewed. There's a little bit of sweet corn still to be eaten, a few peelings still to be digested. So I'm going to leave this here. Once all of that material appears to have been eaten, I can empty it out and use it. But for now, I'm going to pop the lid, the top trays back in place, and leave them to work for a bit longer. I'll check the can of worms probably a couple of times a week to see if they need anything more. I put some more food material in this top tray a few weeks ago, so the bottom trays have been filled up. Now the top tray and the worms will gradually start working their way up into this. I'm not going to put any more material in there at the moment. If I look one tray down, here you can see worms are still active. There's still vegetable material to be eaten. You've got some worm compost already made, so that's working well. I'm going to leave that in place, and the worms, once they've finished eating that, will work their way up into this top tray. For the moment, just leave that in place. Eggshells can be added in small quantities as well, but just crush them up well with your hand to break them into smaller pieces before you scatter it onto the compost below, and this will just release some calcium, which the eggshells are made of, and help to keep the worm compost neutral. Stop it getting too acid, keep it quite neutral, which are conditions the worms would really like. So just literally break up the eggshells into small pieces and scatter them in. Be patient when you're making worm compost, as the speed at which worms feed on material will vary on several factors. Once you feel the material in the bottom tray has been turned into worm compost, you can empty it out and use it as a soil improver. Then wash out the tray and pop it back in the stack at the topmost tray, adding some kitchen waste for worms to work their way up into. And so the worm composting cycle continues, working our way up from the bottom to the top, moving the bottom tray to the top as you use its compost around your garden. I use my worm bin all year round, keeping it in a sheltered position over the winter so it doesn't freeze solid. You could even lift it into your greenhouse or a shed for the winter if you like. Worm activity will slow down in cold weather, so kitchen waste will take longer for worms to break down. So check regularly and top up with a little fresh material as required. You'll actually find lots of different designs of worm composting bin on the market. They are all a little bit different, some with just a single chamber, but others like the Worm Cafe having several stackable trays. Just like the can of worms, you start off by filling the bottom tray, adding more trays over time, so worms completely digest the material in the lower tray before working their way up through the holes in the base of the tray into the trays above. And in addition to lovely worm compost, they also create worm tea, which you can collect and remove through the tap in the base of the compost bin. Dilute this with water and use it for feeding plants all around your garden through the year. For the last few weeks, every time the wind has blown, my garden's been treated to a shower of golden leaves fluttering down like confetti, covering my lawn, my patio and my borders with a layer of leaves from my beautiful silver birch tree. And perhaps you've got the same in your garden. Autumn is here and the leaves have started to fall. Colder weather at night and those ever shortening days is the trigger that deciduous trees and shrubs need to lose their leaves in autumn, and it's the way the plant protects itself. By losing its leaves, it's no longer going to lose moisture, and that will protect the plant and help it get through winter. At first, the green leaves of many plants are transformed, taking on beautiful autumn colours like here on this viburnum, but eventually the leaves will fall and this shrub will be devoid of foliage right the way through winter until new leaves emerge in the spring. The leaves of some deciduous trees and shrubs start changing colour earlier than others, but eventually they all catch up, and as the leaves fall all around us, gardeners are left with a question to answer. Should I collect them or leave them? There's an argument to be made for just leaving them. After all, no one collects the leaves from a forest floor where they sit and slowly rot down to feed the soil organisms and release their nutrients. Some people might do the same in their gardens, where leaves can just lie on the soil and provide shelter for overwintering bugs and creepy crawlies. And some gardeners actually spread leaves around their borders as a mulch. Rain and snow settles them down, worms pull them into the soil, and a thick carpet of leaves can help prevent frost from penetrating the ground, protecting dormant bulbs, perennials and tender roots from damaging frost. Birds like robins and blackbirds, along with other wildlife, will scratch through the leaves in search of food, and larger piles of leaves might even become home to your neighbourhood hedgehog, frogs, toads, beetles or other creatures. However, elsewhere in your garden, a thick carpet of leaves might not be so welcome. A slippery layer on paths and steps is a real hazard, so sweep up leaves with a broom to collect them. They often get blown to the edges and build up into piles, so sweep them up regularly, especially if they cover areas you regularly walk over. Alpine plants or gravel beds and evergreen perennials can get smothered with wet leaves and be killed, so clear these up promptly to make sure plants like this lovely spreading euphorbia alongside my path don't suffer. Unwanted leaves blow into ponds and water features, and these can harm aquatic creatures as they rot down. If you have a water feature that's small enough, then spread a sheet of netting over it before the leaves start falling. That's a really good tip to stop them blowing in. And of course, leaves can block gutters on your home and your greenhouse, so clear these away regularly to prevent them blocking the gutters and the downpipes. If you have trees alongside your lawn, then these will fall and smother the grass like a carpet, building up a wet layer of leaves that can damage grass and encourage moss to develop in the damp conditions. I really hope you're enjoying my video, and if you are, please subscribe to my channel and click the like button. Thank you. For me, collecting leaves is an essential autumn job, but rather than throw them away in the bin or worse still burn them, I save this valuable resource and turn it into wonderful leaf mould compost to use as a soil improver, sprayed over my borders as a mulch, or sieve it to mix into my potting compost. The simplest way to collect leaves is to sweep them up by hand from paths and patios. Try and choose a calm day for the job to stop the leaves blowing everywhere as you try to collect them. On lawns you can rake them up, and a wide pronged lawn rake makes it easier to rake the leaves into piles to collect. While raking and sweeping does the job and gives you some good exercise too, I do find my electric garden vac a really useful tool, sucking them up into a collection bag and shredding them a little in the process too. I find this particularly useful for sucking up leaves from my gravel paths, as my vac is powerful enough to suck up those loose leaves but doesn't suck up the gravel itself. You can run the vac over your borders or among plants to suck up the leaves, and I find this autumn job very satisfying as I tidy up the garden in preparation for the winter ahead. Now, what should you do with those leaves? You could mix small quantities of leaves in with other material in your compost bin, but most leaves take longer to rot down than the softer material like vegetable peelings and grass clippings, so I think they're best stored separately on their own. I prefer to pack the leaves into old compost bags and just store these in a quiet corner behind my shed, leaving them to rot down for a year or so. Fold over or tie up the tops of the bags to keep the leaves moist inside, and always punch a few drainage holes in the base of the bag with a knife to make sure that rainwater doesn't get inside and sit and collect and create waterlogged conditions. A bag of leaf mould has real value too. Just think how much a bag of compost or soil improver costs. So making a few bags of your own for free saves you serious money too. As the year progresses, always make sure the leaves inside the bags remain moist and they don't dry out, as dry leaves won't rot. So check them occasionally, mix them up and add some water if they appear dry. My garden vac actually shreds the leaves a little bit as it collects them, and these smaller pieces of damaged leaf allow the fungi and the other microorganisms to get straight to work and start the rotting process. If you've got large quantities of leaves to compost, then make yourself a large leaf bin using 4 strong corner posts hammered into the ground and sides clad with chicken wire or thick netting. A smaller one could be made using canes and wire netting, but you get the idea. If you've got an even larger garden and you're really into recycling, then use something like some old wooden pallets to make the 4 sides of your leaf bin. Hammer or tie them together to create something that will contain the leaves. Pile in the leaves, make sure they're damp, and cover with old compost bags to hold in the moisture. To collect the leaves from my lawn, I use my lawnmower, raising the blades high so you're not actually cutting the grass, just collecting the leaves and chopping them up as you go, which helps to speed up their breakdown. Just push the mower up and down the lawn, sucking up and chopping up the leaves as you go. This is a great way to pick up all the leaves from your lawn, and very satisfying too. For me, pouring the leaves into old compost bags does the job, so I save up my compost bags through the year to put to good use in the autumn, filling them up with the chopped up leaves, tying up the tops and leaving them to rot down. Now, be patient, an essential virtue of being a gardener. Thin leaves can rot down within about a year, but thick leathery leaves and their coarse stalks will take longer to rot. So keep an eye on them, and I'll check them next autumn to see if my free leaf mould compost is ready to use, or if I need to leave the bags a little bit longer to rot down. And if you do have room to compost even more leaves than your garden produces, then I sometimes pop up with my barrow and broom and sweep them up along my road or local open spaces. pack them into bags and make even more free leaf mould compost. As far as I'm concerned, the more the better. After a year or so, the leaf mould should be ready to use around the garden, and I mainly use mine as a mulch around established shrubs and roses, or as a soil improver, digging it into my soil during the winter cultivations. So there you have it, a few ways of turning fall and autumn leaves into beautiful compost to use around your garden. Now, I like to compost as much of my kitchen waste as possible, and while I often add it to my worm bins and my compost bins, another thing you can do during the winter months is to take your kitchen waste and use trench composting to break it down. So in this bed, I'm probably going to grow a moisture dependent crop this summer, like courgettes or beans. This is a perfect bed to choose for trench composting. All I'm going to do is to take out, start at one end of the bed and take out a trench of soil. Just about a spade's depth is going to be fine. About 8 or 9 inches deep. Just take out one whole trench of soil. There you are, that's about it. About a spade's depth deep, right the way across the bed. And now I make about a bag of peelings from vegetables and fruits every other day in my garden, and all you've got to do is to sprinkle this. Old tea bags, fruit skin, anything like that can be tipped along the bottom of the trench. Crushed up eggshells are fine too. Leave that down there. Now I'm going to bury it. So you then start your second trench across the bed and you turn that soil over onto the old vegetable waste that you've put in the trench. And the idea is that that old vegetable material, I haven't rotten it down in the compost heap. This will break down naturally in the soil and the worms and the soil organisms will start feeding on it. But that will break down. So I take out the second trench, about the same depth as the first one. Then I can get some more of my vegetable peelings, some bits of old veg and fruit skins and so on can go in there. And now I bury that till you start your next trench along and you bury it down. You could just continue from one end of the bed to the other, and the buried material will rot down. And because I'm going to plant out my crops on top of this bed for the summer, the roots of the marrows and courgettes and beans, whatever else I plant on here, will delve down into that lovely organic matter that I've buried down at the bottom underneath them, and those will get down into these old fruit skins and bits and pieces. The roots will get down into it, and the organic matter, which locks in moisture and produces lots of nutrients, will sustain the crop during the summer. So just continue down the bed, taking out a trench, putting in some vegetable material, burying it. Then you can level the surface of this bed and it will be ready for the spring. So the last one I've got here today, just one more bag to put out today. I can continue the rest of this over the coming weeks. This old material can be spread out, buried down at the bottom here. This will just provide some lovely rich organic material for worms like this to delve down into and feed on, and it adds some organic matter for free, saves me buying another bag of compost. All of that matter will break down, so it's buried nicely with a few inches of soil. I'll be planting into that in the spring. the roots will get right down into that rich organic matter and sustain the crops through the summer months.